Welcome everyone to this, our 5th International Women's Day panel discussion. Thank you very much for joining us, and in doing so, for helping us raise money for the charity Farms to Feed Us, which was set up last year, aiming to connect the public with the farmers and the fishers, the bakers, the dairy makers, the growers who might normally have been selling into the hospitality outlets, which were closing their doors. There is hope, of course, that this relationship directly with the shopping public will continue now that the supermarket shelves are fully stocked again and that initial panic buying has stopped. So for many people, this farm to fork relationship has changed the way they shop and the way they feed their families, and has helped so many of those producers to get their food onto our plates. So do look at their database to discover a wonderful list of suppliers to your door. So this time last year, we gathered in the splendour of the Smeg showroom in Regent Street in central London for our International Women's Day discussion. We greeted each other as normal, hugging, kissing, cheek to cheek, handshaking, and then we were packed closely together in the auditorium to listen to our panel. But 3 days later, the World Health Organization confirmed that we were in a pandemic. And within 2 weeks, we were in the first of our lockdown. And we're still there to a certain extent. They're a little less fearful because of the great vaccination process that's continuing. So it is awful that we're not able to meet as we usually do, but it can't be ignored that it has provided a real silver lining to this cloud, and now we can gather easily from all over the world. And I have no doubt that our wonderful panel today would never have had the time to travel into London, to spend the evening with us, to maybe have to stay overnight before getting back to their businesses. So it's wonderful that we have these fabulous women speaking from their farms in Wiltshire and Gloucestershire, in Lanarkshire in Scotland, and all the way away in Nashville, Tennessee. So thank you so much, Helen and Selena, Jess and Sylvia, for your time today. And I will leave the lengthier introductions to the wonderful Sheila Dillon, who has agreed to host again this year for us. And what better person to have at the helm of such a discussion. We are so proud that Sheila is a member of LDE London, which, for those of you who don't already know, is an affiliated chapter of LDEI, Les Dames d'Escoffier International, the fabulous philanthropic organisation set up by a woman who couldn't be accepted into the all-male Les Amis d'Escoffier group over 40 years ago, and which today boasts a group of 45 chapters, over 2,500 leading women in the world of hospitality, fine beverage and food. So do take a look at our websites for further information, lesdamslondon.org or ldei.org. I'm particularly delighted that our current president, Judy Hollis-Jones, is in attendance today, as are other great supporters of our chapter. Hello to Bev, Anne and Olga, whom I've noticed, and good morning, America. And hello to our own London dames and our supportive audience. I recognise many of you who've been with us before. Okay, so we better get going. There's going to be an awful lot to talk about. So Sheila will be chatting for about 35-40 minutes with everyone. We then have a surprise guest, so don't go away, as if you would. And then we'll go into Q&A. So please leave your questions in chat and we'll go through those at the end. So Sheila, it's over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and welcome again. I mean, it's International Women's Day. I mean, I don't think we've ever managed to have one actually on the day, and this is completely brilliant. I feel like instead of my glass of water, I ought to have a glass of wine, because God knows we're celebrating what's been a very, very long haul. We have, as Jackie said, 4 remarkable women and one who's making a surprise appearance with some of her female friends a bit later in the day. But our 4 debaters, speakers are women who've been pushing at the edges of imagination. They've been convention breakers. They are women who are really making a difference, who are role models for other women, who are changing the way we think about farming. And as someone said, I think maybe Helen, when we were having a preparatory meeting, maybe I can't remember who it was now, who said that the enrollment at agricultural colleges in the UK now is pretty 50-50. And it's not very long ago where women were a very tiny minority and training to be in agriculture. I mean, women have been the driving forces in food businesses for a very long time, but they haven't got the credit. It was only recently when I was being interviewed for an archive at the British Library when I was asked to describe my grandmother's, for heaven's sake. And I had to find out about her from things that my father had never told me, my Irish grandmother. And she was always this greatly admired figure because she'd had 13 children, and what a marvelous Catholic, wonderful woman she was. Well, it turned out she'd done all the farming on their, 40 acres, apart from taking the cattle to market. But she was still regarded as the farmer's wife making pin money. I mean, I think this has been very, very common. But things have moved along. So our four speakers are Helen Browning, who is Chief Executive of the Soil Association, which for our international listeners, our participants, is the main standard setting, promoting organization for organic farming in Britain. She's also, I mean, she'll put me right on this, but I think she is the owner of the biggest organic pig production place outdoors, obviously, in the UK. And she's one of the great on the good and all kinds of advisory committees. And she's just someone who's really changed minds. Then we have Selena Cairns from Errington Cheese, which makes a range of raw milk cheeses, which is a damn sight harder in Scotland than it is in England. And many of you will have read about her tenacity in the face of relentless hostility to what her family have been doing for a long time in Lanarkshire. Jess Vaughan, I can't quite remember how I came across Jess, except when she won the Observer Food Award for her kefir. And she has a herd of 70 or so cows, which she takes care of with her father. But she started this remarkable kefir business. It's one of the best kefirs in the business, and she it's distributed by mail order, which is how I get it, but through all markets and many other ways. She's farmer, marketer, creator, like so many of the people here. And then in Nashville, Tennessee, actually within the city bounds of Nashville, Tennessee, we have Sylvia Gagnier, who runs something called Green Door Gourmet, it's a community supported agriculture project. It's 350 acres, not all of it down to growing, but a large area growing fruit, vegetables, herbs, flowers, but it's also an educational center. She has been a chef. That was the first part of her life, a lot of it, and now this is the second part, which is educating not only people in what farming is, but in what good food actually tastes like. And heaven knows the Americans need it even more than we do, and that's saying something. So, Helen, if we could begin with you. The first question is, how did you get to be where you are? I mean, how did you get into farming?
Well, I think I was very lucky in lots of ways because I come from a long line of farmers, and my father had come and taken on this farm here in 1950 as a tenant of the church. So I grew up here and realized before I was 10 that I wanted to farm. And I was lucky enough to have a father who was prepared to give me a go at that, and actually did so when I was pretty young. So when I finished my degree in agriculture and came back here to work alongside him, he said 3 months later, right, I'm off. You can carry on, which at 24 was felt like quite quite like being thrown in the deep end. So I was really lucky to have that opportunity, and I'm so grateful to have a father who gave had such confidence in his daughters, and gave us the chance. Two of us out of the three are farming.
That's remarkable. But as from an early age, you wanted to do that. You thought that was.
Really wanted to do it. I had these great aunts, these four great aunts who lived up near Malvern, and they were farming. They were all spinsters after the sort of First World War, and they lived together and farmed together, and they made this amazing golden butter. And they seemed to have this sort of freedom in their lives that I wasn't seeing in the women that I had in my circle around my family. They seemed to be, they were drinking whiskey and going hunting and just having an uproariously funny time. They were optimistic, positive women who loved their farming life. And I just thought, I want some of that. Actually, I wanted my independence. I wanted to show that it was possible for women to run a farm and do that kind of thing. I wanted financial independence, and I wanted to, I loved the land. I just loved the animals and the land, and thought that's what I wanted to do. And it was very early on. I always stuck to my guns. And as I say, I was just lucky enough to be given the chance.
It just shows, doesn't it, the importance of aunts, of great aunts, of role models. That you saw, and I mean you're younger than I am, but that period when it was we saw as children, we saw single women having a better time of it.
I think that's the case. That really struck home to me, that the level of independence and that they had, and the fun they seemed to have, and that sort of freedom, and less worried about what other people were thinking of them, which I think dogs a lot of women over the years, and certainly back then. But they were impressive folk, and I think it did help to sort of think, yes, that's a possibility. And I think that sort of streak of bloody-mindedness in me, determination to show, as I say, that women could do it, and that it was going to be my name over the door. And that, I don't want to say that in an overly assertive way, but it was quite important at that stage that I was acknowledged as the farmer. And because I felt that was just not often enough. As you said, that wasn't the case most of the time.
Sylvia, what about you? I mean, did you feel that independence for you was, growing? And I mean, you became a chef, but the food was the way to make your mark.
I guess that's a very unusual question, because growing up, I grew up on a dairy farm, and we certainly were told that we could do anything we wanted to do. I had a wonderful dad who was a dairy farmer. So I come from the dairy farming world, even though I'm doing vegetables now. And then I moved into radio and music. And so I was away from the culinary world for a little bit, but it still is hospitality. And I think that is something that the music industry sometimes forget, as we are truly in the hospitality industry as well. So with that, when I came to Nashville, like so many other people, you discover that you have to find something that you can pay the rent and put food on the table. And what's a better way to put food on the table than getting involved in the restaurant industry? So that was kind of my long journey back to farming. And I believe that it's my mission now to bring how farming and food and hospitality all work together. And we can do that through agritourism and being strong role models to all the different components, especially the female component that brings that all together. If you look at farming and the umbrella view of it, it's going to be the women who are the driving force behind everything. And they're making the creative twists and turns that move the industry forward. Otherwise, we would all kind of just still be sitting on the tractor chawing tobacco. I think sometimes it takes the women to really kind of move it forward a little bit.
Because what you're doing is, I mean, I know there's a big community supported agriculture movement in the United States, but you are, I mean, you're doing it on a grand scale. I mean, it's an educational place, it's a tourist place, it's, you're reaching, you've decided to really embrace as many people as possible. I mean, before COVID, how many people did you see on the farm in a month, in a year, whatever, however you count it?
Typically, we would say we had about 80,000 unique visitors a year come through the farm. So not counting the repeat customer who's coming weekly, but a unique customer, about 80,000 a year. And that's a lot of people to keep track of, and it can be distracting from the farming component unless you figure out those educational ways to keep people involved in what you're doing and explain to them why it's important to be good stewards of the land and how we need to take care of things and why being a supporter of things local really matters.
I mean, you, like Helen, had the support of a loving father who believed in you. I mean, that was crucial.
Critical, absolutely critical. Loving, but still tough, and wanted to make you tough enough to handle that. You know, his mantra was, I'm not always going to be there to take care of you. You need to learn how to take care of yourself. That is first and foremost. I'm here to support you, but I'm not here to be a crutch for you to always fall back on. I'm here to be supportive, but you've got to take the lead and figure out how to do that.
Jess, I mean, you work with your father, so we'll touch on that. But you're the one who started this business on your dairy farm. I mean, what was your motivation to get involved in the farm? Jess? We seem to have lost Jess, so I'll move on while
She's
we
on
try.
mute.
Hang on, sorry. I'm back again, sorry. Am I back?
Did you make a question, Jess?
Technology's not my strong point. Yes, when I came back from uni, I was lucky that Dad never assumed that farming was what I was going to do. I was always, allowed to make my choice in life. But I think I saw, just such a lovely way of life and love the farm and the animals. That's my first love, is really the animals. And so when I came back to our organic farm, the only way I was going to make our small herd work was that we had this empty shed, and we thought we could actually make more of the actual raw product we were producing, which is our organic milk. So that was in 2005. And so we set off in our hired van to go and buy a secondhand bottling plant. And we went from there really. So we started with liquid milk, then went to cream, cultured buttermilk, yogurt, and most recently the kefir. So the business has evolved throughout all of that. But yeah, I've been really lucky that Dad's always been very supportive, but just, given me lots of free reign, and very much like Helen, it's been very much, you can do what you want with the place. And it's, it's been a brilliant learning curve.
Do you see yourself as a role model for other women?
I don't know. I never really thought about it. I would hope so. I think it's probably shown quite a lot of determination over the years to make it work. We're tenant farmers, so we haven't got a huge amount of capital behind us. So certainly every opportunity I like to take with both hands and make the most of.
And one of the problems that other women have talked about, other women trying to break into farming or have actually got into farming, has been the difficulty of getting capital. Was that a problem for you, or was the fact that you were working with your dad that made that easier?
I guess I was lucky to come to a farm which was already running as an organic dairy farm. But in that, I kind of did walk into a very downtrodden organic dairy market. So the farm was losing a huge amount of money at that time. So it was kind of, turning it around into a realistic business proposition was kind of quite a daunting prospect, I guess.
But you've been undaunted.
Yeah, no, we've been undaunted. Dad always says I have kind of, I guess we're still the same. We're still quite laid back people at heart. But he's like, at the beginning, you were too shy to do much. Now you'll take on anything. So I guess I've changed a lot with it. But yeah.
Selina Cairns. Selina, what motivated you to, you joined a family business too, but you've brought tenacity to it, as I said in my introduction, that it's just remarkable.
Well, I did go to university and study something completely different and worked in the construction industry actually, and then I suppose my dad was getting closer to retirement, and I don't know, I felt drawn back to here. And yeah, I suppose I worked together with him for a couple of years, and then he sort of retired and moved up north where my stepmother lives now. But yeah, we've sort of developed the business on, I suppose, with the cheese, and we've brought goats into the farm as well now. So yeah, it's quite a different place to when he was here, but he's always been here for me.
Yeah. Did you have role models like Helen's hunting, whiskey drinking aunts when you were growing up? Women who role models?
No, I don't really remember anybody specific. There's always some very large characters in the farming world, isn't there? And I suppose you remember certain ones of them, but I mean, my father was quite a big character, so I suppose he sort of encouraged me into it, and you know, sort of helped me to be enthusiastic about it and love the sheep and love what we're doing with the milk. So yeah.
But when you in the midst of this this terrible, long series of events which threatened to finish your business, what made you stick at it? What made you think, they're not going to do it? What they're saying is untrue. They're not going to ruin us.
Well, they were wrong, and I suppose we were accused of something so serious in the E. coli outbreak in 2016, and I don't think I ever really felt I had any other option at the time. But I mean, it is a bit like rail tracks. You can't get off once you start, and I suppose, thinking back, if I'd known it was going to go on for so long, I don't know whether I would have thought differently or approached it differently, because it's, it really took it out of us as a family. So my children were quite very young then as well, and it was a hard period. But I'm glad we've done it now. But I don't think that the problem's gone away, if you like. It's always going to be kind of lurking in the background, especially in Scotland, where there's not very many people making raw milk cheese. So, yeah.
You need support from other countries. Yes. Helen, what has the last year, the lockdown, been like for you and your business? I mean, how have you made it through?
Well, it's been a sort of tale of three parts in lots of ways, because as well as the farming end of it, which, and then to some extent, the farming just has to run on. You can't sort of furlough people, or we did have one herdsman who had to shield for 3 months, which was pretty difficult, because actually we do have, as well as the pigs, we have 2 herds of dairy cows and cereals and tree crops and all sorts of other things as well. But the real impact was on our pub and hotel, which we have in the middle of the farm. And obviously that all had to shut down, open up again, shut down again. And to some extent on our marketing business, because we put our products into retailers around the country, and people like Riverford, Naval and Cole. And so it was, the farm kind of had to just keep going, which was okay. The pub was really traumatic, and we had to, in fact, we did lots of new stuff there, because suddenly you had to try and keep the show on the road. So we opened a shop, and we started doing home delivery, initially locally and then nationally, and that's continued. And we started feeding the NHS, actually. We started feeding night staff in our local hospital, supported by a local charity. So we did lots of new stuff, and sort of got through it, and have actually got probably more interesting business coming out of it the other end. And then on the sort of sales side, it was actually very busy, because everybody moved to online retailing, and people stopped because they weren't buying out of home in the hospitality sector. They were buying more food through the supermarkets, and organic became had a really strong run. The growth has been very strong. So we've actually been really busy on that front. So it's been a real mixed bag, and we've just had to, I think, like a lot of businesses, been quite inventive and tried to keep everybody sane by employing them enough, even whether we did use a bit of furlough, to make sure people have got some structure in their lives still, because I think for a lot of people that's really important.
So you look back at this, God knows, let's hope we are able to look back soon, and see some real benefits.
Yes, I think we will. I mean, it's been a hideous time, and you can never say it almost feels sort of sacrilege to talk about there being benefits of such a ghastly time when so many people have lost their lives and it's been so traumatic. But I think actually, when it's particularly in hospitality, there's never a day when you're off duty. So actually having a period of time where you can take stock, think about the future, have some opportunities to come up with new things. I think the fact that people have been eating more at home, they've been cooking more, they've been appreciating their ingredients and where they come from more, and lots of surveys showing that. I think there's been some benefits for a lot of people in working more from home, where they've been able to. So I do think there's been something that will have helped us as a society coming out of this. And as a business, as I say, I don't think it's been all bad. I think we've shown what we can do when the chips are down, in terms of being innovative and doing things differently. And that's what, as a world, given all the challenges we've got coming our way with climate change and biodiversity loss and everything else, we need to be able to change fast and well. So in a way, I hope this kind of pandemic will springboard us into a bit more action on other fronts too.
Sylvia, do you think that it might be this awfulness might be a springboard into something better? You're muted, Sylvia.
I think Helen was so right on the money in what she said. It really is multifaceted. But we discovered that people are so interested in what I'm calling the victory over COVID garden, instead of just the regular victory garden. Everyone wants to grow things at home. So they come to the local farmer now to learn about how to plant their own garden. And the epic failures that so many people had in the COVID time, because it was their first time trying this. 80%, the recent market study says 80% of the persons who started home gardens are going to do it again this year. So to me, that's a market for selling more plants, starting more plants in our greenhouse, offering more socially distanced classes here on our farm that people can come and actually understand how to plant things. So for me, that has been one of the big pivots, if you will, the word of the year last year, and what we do, as well as producing food. I think people sometimes believe that a small garden is going to feed their family for the duration of a season, and they forget not one squash plant is going to make it from the beginning of April all the way through November. You're going to have more than one, so they don't know about succession planting and so many of those things. So that educational component has been a blessing, because we can impart that to our community and sell our plants to go along with that as well.
I know that you're very involved in all kinds of organizations in Nashville. I mean, you're on the mayor's committee, I think, and you know, these leadership roles that you play. Have you seen during this period that those organizations, you know, take more seriously what you and, you know, other CSAs and organic growers and people are doing? Do they take you more seriously now?
Statewide, I do believe, because the food shortage that happened in the United States, the production shortage, sent everyone into a tizzy. And you probably had the food hoarding issues and everything there as well. But in the United States, it was just horrific. Long lines at the grocery stores, even trying to order online, you couldn't get particular things. And I think that was a very large wake-up call for supply chain changes and information. And so figuring out how to take what you're doing and make it last through a season into another season has been very important. And that is the bell that's ringing very loud for everyone, is supply chain. And that makes people take farmers more seriously, because it just can't come from everywhere all over the world coming in. It has to be more locally sourced. And I believe that has been initially very important, but that has now fallen off as the markets have begun to open up for the average consumer. So the powers that be are still very aware there could be another supply chain interruption at any moment, but the average consumer has gotten much more comfortable in just going back to the regular store, or their typical way of life, versus seeking out these wonderful artisan producers like are on the panel as well.
Jess, what about you? I mean, what has COVID and lockdown done to your business?
I think, like other panelists, we have seen some sort of dips and peaks in our market. So the online kefir business has been growing and growing. And certainly there's been a huge interest in the culture products and the yogurt and stuff on shelf. But we lost obviously all the restaurants, and that was quite a big part of our liquid milk business. And Gloucester services are just at the road from us, obviously less travel, less footfall in there. So it has been a bit of a roller coaster, but we have actually managed to maintain our turnover at about the same level as previous years. It's just taken a lot more kind of quick thinking and kind of changing as we go, and just kind of trusting our gut instinct and going for it, really. Yes, it's been an interesting year, to say the least.
Do you think you will, I mean, have you learned something that will help in the future?
I think probably had people have had more time on their hands to sort of be more interested in where their food's coming from. So probably on a daily basis, I'm talking to people, emailing them, or just allowing people to understand more about our dairy business and the ladies and stuff, and where their food is actually coming from. So I think it's probably, I think the lesson has been that people are genuinely interested in what we are doing, and it's worth just continuing to tell our story to allow them to make informed decisions, whatever the media says, or whatever comes our way. It's always worthwhile educating.
Selena, what about you? What difference has the lockdown made to you? Any positive?
I think we lost. I didn't realize that initially how much of we relied on the hospitality trade, because it's quite it's artisan cheese and blue cheese particularly, and people I think initially wanted stove cupboard cheese, if that makes sense, and so it wasn't blue cheese and it wasn't the lactic goat's cheese we were making, so we had to adapt what we were making just to try and keep cheese sold. I think from the plus side, we sort of developed online cheese sales and click and collect. So people did lots of people now come and buy cheese directly from the farm, which they never did before. They sort of cycle up and use it as an excuse for their daily exercise, which is nice. So yeah, I mean, we do need it. Our business needs the hospitality industry to reopen again fully. I mean, we kind of got better, everything got better again in the summer, and then we've been in lockdown since the end of September here in this area, because we were in a high tier. So and well, so is the central belt of Scotland, really. So we were kind of held up a bit because London, we were allowed to sell cheese, and obviously into London, who did keep everything going a bit longer, so that helped. But yeah, it's been a very up and down, and it's quite, this time round, I don't think there's the same level of support, because people are just exhausted now after months and months of a second or third lockdown. So,
did you feel the Jamie Oliver effect when he, I can't even remember when it was now, June, July, no, it was before that, May, when that Instagram multi-million people watched that Instagram where he highlighted 3 cheesemakers, all of them in England, about what it meant, why it was so important, and then suddenly, Neil's Yard, the biggest wholesaler of farmhouse cheeses, suddenly their business was turned around, etc. Did you feel that up in your part of the world?
well, we were not. Well, I suppose we kind of did our own social media, sort of trying to make people aware that we needed them, I suppose. And I suppose some awareness did help, but it did that we did focus on very large cheesemakers, and I felt really frustrated at the time, actually, because a lot of them had furloughed their staff. They were just able to sell the
Who was
milk.
concentrating on big cheesemakers?
Sorry?
Sorry, who was concentrating on big
Oh,
cheesemakers?
the sort of campaign, they were kind of the bigger.
Pen Farm Dairy, Graham, Kirkham's, Lancashire, they're not big.
I suppose big in comparison with us, I guess. And well, obviously they're using cow's milk, and a lot of the farmers were just selling the milk into the sort of liquid pool, and we couldn't follow anybody, and you know, we had nowhere to sell our sheep and goats milk. So yeah, it was. I think it was quite concentrated on certain producers. And I did speak to Neil's Yard about it, because they have included us, and especially they had our cheese in the January one, January just being, and they felt they had to choose the bigger ones who could match the demand.
Yeah. How big are your herds? How many goats and how many sheep do you have?
We have just over 100 goats, and we're milking about 300 sheep.
Right. Okay, well, sort of, you know, big questions now, sort of what you've all taken out of this horrible period we've all been going through. But what would you each do? I mean, what would make the biggest difference to our food system right now? You know, if let's pretend we had a government that was really interested in quality food production. And sorry, that's my cynical journalist question. But Helen, you know, you're at the top of the pile in policy making. What would you do?
I think one of the issues that needs really tackling is the amount of ultra processed food we're eating in our diets. And I think coming out of COVID and the concentration on health and obesity and the increasing evidence base that it's kind of junk food that's driving that. And you know, the evidence base is really clear now that is where we should be concentrating some of our efforts. Because we eat something like 52%, maybe a bit more than that now, of what we eat in the UK is what they call ultra processed. It's basically junk food with a lot of additives. And if we were able to start to encourage more people to eat fresh food, well prepared, I think we would have a huge impact on the nation's health, and we'd be supporting great producers like my panelist colleagues today. I think there's a lot to do on that side of things. I mean, there's so many things that need to happen, but that's one area, if you're looking at climate and nature and human health, that I would be really jumping on right now.
But there's never any join up, is there? I mean, the government has an obesity strategy, but it says absolutely nothing about not eating ultra processed food. And it's as though the new science of the gut biome, you know, we now know that if you have a healthy gut, which you cannot have if you eat ultra processed food, you have a healthy body and mind.
And we're just not connecting that up at all. In France, they have 14% of their diet is ultra processed, and they think that's too high and are trying to drive it down. You know, the gap is massive. And here we're still fixated on calories and on salt, sugar, and fat, and without thinking about what form these are being parceled together and sold to us, and these sort of long life products. So I think that is an area we should really be focusing on if we want to sort out our health. One other area that we're very keen to highlight more is the way we're feeding all our animals, because you know, this debate about the future, and both from our health point of view, but also from a planetary point of view, you know, we need to stop diverting 60% of the the crops we grow into animal systems if we want to feed everybody healthily and well into the long term. So, you know, I think those are two things that I'm particularly focused on at the moment.
What do you feed your cows, pigs, your animals?
So our cows are largely grass-based, grass silage and grazed grass. We do feed some homegrown grains, particularly in the winter, to them. And pigs do eat grain, so they are grain eaters. And I think at the moment, the debate around what sort of meats we should use, whether pigs and chickens are better than beef and lamb, I think even though I'm really fond of my pigs, I do think that diverting a lot of grain that we could be eating directly ourselves into pigs and chickens is wrong. They should be waste recyclers. That was their traditional role in society, rather than competing with humans for prime quality grain and proteins. So I'm very keen to see pigs and chickens increasingly using the offcuts, as it were, from the human food system, which is hard to do because of BSE and foot and mouth and all the reasons why we've stopped feeding waste to pigs. But that needs to be back on the table again. And of course, we need to be thinking about waste overall. And I think, again, that's an issue that people are focused on more in terms of what they're doing in their own homes, and probably has improved through COVID because people are planning their meals a bit more and maybe buying a bit more regularly rather than big shops. I don't know, but it seems to be something that people are focusing on more.
Sylvia, I mean, Helen mentioned that the French eat 14% ultra high processed food. We eat, I think it's 55 roughly % ultra high, but the Americans eat 80% of their diet is ultra high processed food. And there has been this debate, well, it's hardly a debate. There has been academics and writing about what we're actually going through is not a pandemic, it's a syndemic, it's a virus hitting an already sick population. And that is particularly true in the United States and in the United Kingdom. I mean, what's your take on this?
We have to start with the health of the soil and then move it to the health of our human beings. We are so far removed from the source of our food in the United States. As you have the number there at 80%. Our culture loves convenience foods. They are snackers 24/7. Every time you turn around, someone has a snack or a pop or whatever in their hand. And the original question that was proposed to Helen, I'd like to go back to that a little bit. And what do I see happening to big picture this scenario? One, we have to change what we think of as processed food. The average consumer has had to cook a lot during the pandemic, and it has totally blown their mind. I have to put a meal on the table, 3 meals a day. I can't just go out and grab something from wherever and bring it back and have our snack. And so we have to change what processed food looks like. That's what we're trying to do on our farm. We're actually building a manufacturing component to what we do so that you can come in and you can buy a healthy version of, say, a butternut squash lasagna. So instead of using the pasta sheets, you're using the butternut squash as the noodle, and have it as a frozen product that we can make from things right here on our farm. So we have to get the nutrient-rich food to the people from the healthy soil that this food is grown in, to change that whole big picture you were talking about, which then changes our immunocompromised bodies that we have from consuming the wrong food. So it is all very interrelated in what you were speaking about, from the convenience food being ultra processed instead of just a processed food. Processed food could mean you took a knife to it and you cut it up according to the government. Now it changes from being something I've grown to something that I've manufactured or processed on my farm. So how they look at it has to begin to work for us, not against us as farmers and as culinarians.
Jess, what about, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, getting people to see what food is and what processing is. Jess, I mean, the bigger question, what change would you like to see? I mean, that would help you, that people like you, but also women farming and producing food.
I think it's quite important for us to get across to consumers how important their food choices are and what they choose to purchase. It's kind of like a vote for that farming system, if you like. And without, the support for local producers, we'll disappear. And to sort of buy the best they can afford rather than always, shopping for the cheapest, perhaps actually just make conscious decisions, and if, you know, a few extra pounds here and there would make a massive difference to the overall agricultural community. And in terms of women in sort of food production, it's a question that I never really ask myself. I never think it holds me back or anything. Certainly the interest in our kefir this year has been, you know, very much what we were just talking about, sort of taking care of your gut health and kind of the overall health of yourself. You don't have to pinpoint something, just feeling overall better is you know, enough to sometimes be better as a whole, as a population.
Selena, same question, really.
I think the governments really need to start looking at how, you know, young entrants and new entrants into farming who haven't, you know, having a farm passed down to them from another generation, how they can get into it and bring in kind of a new take on things, both from a sort of environmental perspective and growing things and just doing things in a different way. Because, I mean, you know, our farm is sort of a marginal farm. We're 1,000 feet above sea level. We've got about 250 acres. And, you know, if we ran this like a commercial farm around here, we just wouldn't make any money. So, you know, we're lucky because we've got, you know, we're able to do what we do, and, you know, we employ people, and it's, you know, a good little business. But there's so many more things people could do around here. You know, we don't have any vegetables being grown in Lanarkshire at all. I mean, so yeah, and it's sort of just getting a balance between intensive and extensive. You know, so the government, you know, because it feels at the moment that you're either encouraged to become very organic and, you know, going down the sort of very grass-fed, you know, which I'm all in favour of, but, you know, it's providing affordable food in the best sort of ways you can, and the best ways for the land. Because I mean, a lot of the farms around here, the dairy farms, they have sort of cows that have been kept in all year round, and it's crazy, really, when we can grow grass here, and, you know, they should be out. But that's the way these farms have identified they can make money, you know, smaller farms like ours, and so they're obviously having to feed them grain, and it's a sort of survival thing. And maybe it doesn't, but I mean, people also need to become a bit more aware of, when they buy strawberries at Christmas time, you know, what is the environmental impact of that? Is it different to eating lamb and beef and dairy products? So there's so many questions. I could go on and on.
Scotland, I mean, it seems, she says, speaking from the south of England, it seems like the Scottish government always talks a good game. You know, they have the advisory food panel, or they did. And yet, does that translate into actually doing those things you just mentioned? I mean, because those farmers who are keeping their cows in all year round, you know, I mean, we know what prices they're getting from the processors. They're not making much money. I mean, they must be reliant on farm payments and, you know, B&Bs. I mean, they can't possibly be making a good living that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the government, obviously farming is much more important to the Scottish economy than it is to the English economy, just because we are more rural and spread out. And yeah, I mean, they say certain things, but then they're giving big grants for intensive, you know, it's all about productivity and, you know, your margins. And so they are giving grants out for huge sheds for intensive dairy cattle, for instance. And it would just be nice if they could see sort of support for smaller farms. So it tends to be well, around here now, it seems that the farms just keep getting bigger. So one farm buys another farm and they do well, and then they buy another farm. So they become a really big scale. And it makes sense for sharing machinery and things in some ways, but it does mean everything becomes a lot more intensified.
But the model for that, Sylvia, is the United States, where dairy farming has just become vast and thousands of cows and it's because you're always chasing this margin, but you have 10,000 cows and you're still only making 1%. I mean, it's the road to nowhere, isn't it? Or am I just being
it falls into this unique conflict of vertical integration that, okay, now you have the cows and now you're growing the grain for the cows, and then you have the silo for the cows, and you become this large conglomerate of everything under one because you have such a thin margin. It's back to the 1970s, late 60s, 1970s, Earl Butt's mentality of go big or go home, and plant fence row to fence row and make your farm as large as it can possibly be. And that's been the American push for agriculture. A few years ago, I was on a panel, and it was the ambassador of agriculture for China. And they were speaking about how much they wanted to move toward the American system of agriculture, of getting bigger and bigger and bigger and taking over all the small farms and doing that. And it all but made my head spin around, and saying, we have great stewards of our land, and these women as well. And we need to really be working on taking care of what's going on a smaller scale before you can even think about a larger scale, because it just gets lost in translation at that point.
It does get lost in translation. Helen, I mean, you're an optimist, and that's good because you fill the rest of us with hope when we're faced by issues like that. But how do you kind of begin to steer government policy again away from this, as Selena just said, this endless grants to build vast barns and for big production? How do you try and how do you steer the ship?
Well, I think this is a really critical time for that steerage, because as we've left Europe, we're making up our own farm policies, and the mantra is public money for public goods, and all the money is going to be steered, in theory at least, towards paying for those environmental goods and services, the fresh air and clean water and all that kind of stuff that farmers should be delivering and aren't rewarded for. But there is going to be money for things like productivity grants. And it's going to be very important to challenge, as the details of those grants start to emerge, that they're not locking us into these kind of systems which are a dead end as far as feeding the world well is concerned. So I think this is a really important moment to look at the detail of what's coming out, and to say, is this taking us on the right road that's actually in line with government policy, because government policy is that they want to have a cleaner, better food system, or is it actually a schizophrenic? On the one hand they're saying this, on the other hand they're doing that. I think there's other stuff we can do as well, though, because I think in some ways government is a bit agnostic on what size farms are. I think they accept that actually you can get successful farms of all sorts of sizes. I think one of the things we need to do is to create opportunities for new entrants into some of these larger holdings. I mean, I farm quite a large farm here, albeit as a tenant, and I'm really aware that the only thing really that stops me having even more complexity on the farm — we've already got 4 or 5 enterprises, most people think is a lot — is actually my ability to manage all that complexity. And so what you really need is somebody to come along and say, actually, could you give me 10 acres to grow some vegetables? Can I have a house of laying hens? There are loads of opportunities to start up new enterprises within larger holdings and to grow those businesses from there. So I'm really keen to see more people coming in. I think this is a time when we could start to see more people coming in, giving those kind of opportunities, even governments starting to think about how do you help create more of the county council type farms, which give new entrants a start. I think we need to broker those relationships between people who want to farm, at least some of the time, and the larger landowners who've got land really that isn't doing an awful lot, growing monocultures or whatever, but there could be so much more diversity in the countryside. There's some challenges around that, things like housing and stuff as well. But I do think it's actually up to us to start to create some of those opportunities.
When you say us, I mean, here you are, 4 remarkable women farmers, growers, producers, and do you get together as women farmers? I mean, couldn't you be an enormously powerful lobbying group?
We're probably all working in our different sort of lobbies to some extent and having some sort of crossover. There is a ladies in agriculture kind of network, which some of us might belong to. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I think we're probably all quite active in our own areas, are we? Maybe ask the others.
No. Sylvia, what about you? I mean, do you see yourself as part of a lobbying group? And I mean, do you lobby? Well, I mean, you belong to all these, you're advising the mayor and so on. But is there a strong women farmer grower lobbying group in the United States?
In the United States, there are a few different factions, if you will. There's the Ladies National Home Gathering. There are women farmers and homesteaders. There's also a home economics group in the United States, and that parlays a little bit into growing the gardens and that. In the Nashville area, there are the women farmers of Middle Tennessee. There's Middle Tennessee growers. There are a number of smaller ones, but as for a large lobbying collective, it is not together in the United States at this point. It's still lots of small factions around.
Well, before we go to our final guest, I just have a last question before we go to questions from our listeners, our viewers. Sorry, it's being on the radio. The International Women's Day theme this year is choose to challenge. So what would your challenge be to the world right now related to women in the food, farming, and drink industry? Sylvia.
Women are nurturers. It's our nature. Mother Earth. Let's go back to looking at that and saying we can lead and we can nurture at the same time. Just given the opportunity to have the access to the land, have access to the capital, and to have access to the right tools to move forward. So I would say on International Women's Day is we take care of Mother Earth, we take care of each other, and then we can take care of our communities around that.
Jess, what about you? What's your challenge to the world from a dairy farmer, kefir, yogurt, milk, cream producer?
I think just evolving the markets and listening to our customers and giving them real value for money in what we're doing and producing as a different kind of niche. There's smaller producers, but they can actually taste the difference and actually but there's real value in what we do. I think possibly overall I'd like the price paid for agricultural products per unit to be higher. Overall, because I think then farming systems would evolve that weren't chasing pence for very small margins, but actually to give an overall a fair income. Because if farmers were paid by the hour and not by the litre or the unit, they'd all be working well under the minimum wage, most of them, and that seems a bit unfair.
Yeah, I mean the key to this, which we all elephant in the room, etc., is we don't pay the real price for food. And people say, oh well, you have to have cheap food because there are poor people. Well, perhaps you should deal with the poor people and pay them properly, and then it wouldn't be the same issue, would it? Selena, it's your challenge. Choose to challenge. What do you want to challenge that would benefit women in food and farming and drink?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with Sylvia and Jess. It's access to land and capital to be and sort of support and mentorship, which some of the programs like Women in Farming, that we have in Scotland can support people into it, because ultimately we'll all be stronger if there are more of us and more different types of businesses. Yeah, I don't. I mean, it is. Well, I suppose we just don't really know quite how what's coming next with food policy exactly, and what Brexit means. It's a bit unsure yet, and how people are going to, whether they're going to keep supporting their local producers, when we go back to normal, hopefully. Yeah.
Helen, I mean, you've answered some of this, but this is this choose to challenge. So what's the focus of your challenge that would make life better?
I think the challenge, as far as getting more women involved, is probably a two-way one. I think firstly, I think businesses work better when you have more women involved, and so I think that there's every reason, whether it's on farms or in other parts of the retail chain, for more women to be encouraged in. But where it's really noticeable, all of us here are running our own shows. And we've had a way in through our dads or through some opportunity that's come our way. What I'd love to see is more women going into farm management, and actually making that a professional career. I know of no senior women farm managers, and that feels like a glass ceiling that's there to be broken. So I think women who want to do that and actually getting themselves into the position where they can challenge for those jobs, because they can do the engineering as well as the car rearing. They can do the full range of things that's required. So I liked the idea of Sylvia's dad saying, you must never think there's no job that's not for you. You've got to get out there and make sure you're competent all round. So I think there's a challenge to women to make sure that if we want to have a crack at some of those types of jobs, that we get ourselves into a good position to take them on. And then we need some enlightened folk to give us a chance to take up those positions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at this point, we are joined by someone is butting into the conversation. I'm sorry, it's an old joke with Dot McCarthy from Cronkshaw Fold Farm in Rossendale in Lancashire. Dot, are you there? Are you there with your friends?
Hello, yes, I am. I've really enjoyed listening to everybody on the panel. That was some cool stuff you're all saying.
Well, just tell us a bit about, you have a farm in obviously the hills, the Pennines, on the edge of the Pennines. And
yeah, that's right.
How many acres?
So we've got 50 acres of in-by down by the farm, and then a 900-acre common that you can see up behind me. These are some of our Hebrideans here. So I know most of you have sort of been billed as, oh, this is the lady with the goats, because we've been putting our goats on the internet for video calls. But we're predominantly a hill farm, so this is some of our Hebridean ladies here, and one of my dogs in the background, just bringing them over to make sure they're in shot. Yeah, so we're just about an hour north of Manchester.
So tell us a bit about, it's supposedly a joke that you put some of your, you offered your goats to people who wanted to, let them join a Zoom call. Tell us what happened. What were you thinking?
So I've been wanting since I was very little, since I was a little girl, to switch the whole farm onto renewable power. So it's a family farm here. My mum ran it before me, and I took over about 4 years ago. And we're up in the sticks, so all the fires and everything, it's all coal and oil, and light the fire to have a bath, even now in like the 21st century, which is obviously ridiculous. So we really wanted to I really wanted to swap the whole farm onto renewable power, all the farm buildings, and be creating all our own power on site, because I'm really concerned about climate change. So I've been trying to raise enough money to buy solar panels and battery storage since I took over. So we'd started doing weddings at the farm, and we've got some accommodation. In fact, you can see just in the trees the roof of one of our yurts down here. So it's kind of like quirky accommodation around the farm, but that's all shut because of COVID. So I've been trying to think of other things we can do. And some friends were saying how bored they are in all these long video meetings. So I thought, maybe we could just put a goat in the call. So it started as a joke. I didn't think anyone would actually want to book a goat for their work meetings, but I was very wrong, it turned out.
And I mean, just describe. I mean, you've made what, £50,000 from this? £5 a go, I heard. I read.
Yeah. So we've done over 10,000 calls now. Before the pandemic, I'd just taken on my first 2 employees, because the educational visits that we do here, the weddings and the accommodation, have been doing really well. So I was running the farm side, and the 2 staff were running sorting out the guests and the visitors. So COVID put a stop to that. And I was just like, what? These are my first 2 employees and I've only had them for 2 months. This is crap. What can I do to try and keep them in work and keep the farm business growing? So we were just trying to think of anything they could do to make extra revenue. I was selling poo, so literally selling bags of manure from the muck heap because everyone was gardening, weren't they, at the beginning of the lockdown? So that worked really well, but we just couldn't shovel it fast enough, and just more ideas kept coming, and that's when we stumbled on the goats on Zoom idea, and it's just been, I can't believe how crazy it's gone. We literally put a post up on, we updated the farm website, like it was mainly to get more traffic to the website so people would buy more produce from us. So there's these funny like goat profiles that we'd written, and then there was a button at the bottom like, email us if you want a goat to join our meeting. And it was mainly sort of tongue-in-cheek. We didn't think anyone would actually want a goat to join their meeting, but here we are, 10,000 calls later.
See, at the beginning of this introduction, which you didn't hear, I was saying that we had a panel of women who were just pushing the boundaries, all these ideas. I mean, your ideas are remarkable. I was just looking at your website this morning, those beautiful climate friendly places to stay on your farm. So what were you doing? You were milking the goats before, what, and them doing what?
They're meat goats. What I've been trying to do is, they've kind of been a bit of an experiment, and ironically we were gonna sell them all this autumn we're in at the moment, like this autumn just gone even, because what we've been trying to do is see if we can grow meat goats, but that are completely sort of grass and browsing fed, because obviously goats are a browsing animal, not just a grazing animal. So we were sort of trying to experiment with, if we put them on some rough grazing, which has got trees and shrubs as well. So it's kind of like a bit conservation grazing, and then see how they go in terms of meat percentage when they go to be butchered. So we were experimenting with that for about 5 years, and they've done all right, but we just can't compete with the other people that are on grain as well. So we were like, how can we make it so the goats don't make a loss? What can we do? So we'd been doing some goat yoga, which is obviously nuts. Anybody who's not heard of it, it is, I don't understand it, but people want to do it and they want to pay for it, so that's all money towards the solar panel. So we're just cracking on with that, and now the video calls have just gone balmy, so they're earning their keep through somewhat of an unusual way. But they're boar goats, so South African, so they're inside during the winter. And the boys all go for meat, and we've been keeping the girls for breeding for this sort of experimental grazing project.
I feel like I should let the other 4 ask them. I'm sure they're all dying to ask you a question. Sylvia's in Nashville, Tennessee. Sylvia.
Yes, I just want to know if I can to join you and rent the Pyrenees dogs to be on the call at the same time, so they can herd the goats and everyone can watch in the call. It can be a whole chain together as all the women linked. Helen can show her pigs. We can have a pig over here, and we can increase the number of Zoom participants, and I'll provide the Pyrenees, since I don't have any animals other than the Pyrenees dogs for entertainment. Zucchini growing is not very exciting.
Zucchinis on Zoom. It kind of sounds cool.
Yes. Did you have any questions?
Just think if there's any opportunity for cows to join in as well, but no, hats off to you. Just an amazing idea, and it's obviously paying off. No, it's it's amazing.
What about you, Selena? Have you thought of adding your goats to getting them to be entertaining us all?
I haven't, but I think I should do. And I'd also love to chat to you actually about your project, just with because with obviously the dairy goats are we'd love to get them grazing more, but to increase that, the grass that they're consuming. But yeah, I'll have to catch up some other time about that. But yeah, no, it's great. Well done.
Well, everybody on this call should go into I think there's a website, isn't there? Cronkshawfoldfarm.co.uk. Anyway, you just have to put goats and dot, and Google will throw all kinds of stuff up. I mean, how are you dealing with being a media? How are you and the goats dealing with being media stars, Dot?
well, it's basically my employees that used to look after wedding guests and sort out the accommodation are now, their job titles have just changed slightly. So they're now goat zoomers. So they're in the barn right now, which is over there. So yeah, they crack on and do that. So that when they're here, that's their new job now. And then when they're not here, I'm doing it. So we start at 6 o'clock in the morning and we run till 9:30 in the evening. And then we do another hour for anyone. So we do pre-records for people who are in different time zones and stuff, so we can email them over videos. We've started this new thing talking of women in farming. As a lady that I met recently through it's a peer networking group, and she runs the company that make EnviroBed, if anybody uses that on their farms. She's super cool, this woman, and she's got a background in animal nutrition. And I had this idea about, because no one can talk to each other and share special messages in person at the moment, I was trying to think what we could do to sort of address that need. So I thought, what about if we got edible paper that the goats could eat and edible ink? And then we can write out the messages that people want to share. You know, maybe somebody's pregnant, or maybe someone's just got engaged and they can't meet up and tell their friends. So we write it out on the edible paper, and then they've all got a Zoom call with their friends, and then the goats appear and everyone's confused, like, what's going on? And then the goats write in the chat saying, we've got a special message, and then people are even more confused. And then the edible paper appears in the barn and people read it, like, oh my God, you're having a baby, or whatever the news is. And then we feed the paper to the goats, and then everyone's even more confused, like, what's going on?
I thought you developed a technique where you could feed a message into a goat on edible paper, and somehow it would come out the other end and you could put it back together. Probably going a bit...
like a goat fax machine.
My first question to all the panel, my last one to you before we go to questions, is where did the strength and motivation come from for you to do all this?
The climate change is terrifying, so I want to do something about it.
It's a good answer.
That's it, really. That's it. It's coming. It's coming. We need to do something fast. So yeah, that's why.
Well done, Dot. We'll all be booking your goats very soon. Because, anyway, it was marvelous. Even if we didn't see your goats, seeing you was marvelous. Okay, we go back to Jackie for questions.
Yes,
thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dot. Love it. And as a Lancastrian, just seeing those hills in the background makes me very homesick. Although I'm not envying that chilly weather. Nevertheless, we've had some fantastic discussion and lots of wonderful comments. One that really popped out, oh gosh, got to find it. Yes, from Dr. Catherine Chong, Farms to Feeders. She was saying to chefs and farmers, in your experience, is it right to say that there are so few women in the decision-making positions in wholesale purchasing? Does this spiral into systemic neglects in certain social issues in agri-food, reflecting the percentage of women in decision-making positions across the agri-food hospitality industries? Woo. So, Helen, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure about in the wholesale purchasing domain, but I think that not having enough women in decision-making roles within almost any industry means you end up neglecting a lot of the non-financial issues that we all are talking about and caring about. So I think it's been clear that women have been at the forefront of the environmental side of things like animal welfare. And actually, I think if you don't have women in the room, if you don't have women in positions of power helping to make those decisions, you tend to find that the decisions get made just in the interests of the sort of corporate survival or profitability. So I do think if you want to have a more, balanced approach in the world, and we want to get more than one thing right, it's really important to have more women involved.
Yeah, Jess, what have you found whilst you've been selling your products, and are you Are you coming across more men than women who are perhaps purchasing from you?
I think probably in the restaurant trade there are a huge amount of men in decision-making roles. But I think, just, yeah, it depends. It does vary hugely. A bit like farming, I never feel particularly outnumbered, because I think that is growing all the time, that women are in more, making decisions. But yeah, it's a changing or evolving all the time.
Yeah. Now we've got a question here from Meredith. Meredith is a London dame, and she has a company, Calm Cocoa. Meredith asks, she says she'd love to know what the panel think on how non-farmers, which is most of us, could have a better understanding of what really goes into our food production, and maybe also appreciating or being happy to pay more for food if we can afford it, particularly as most UK supermarkets still seem to focus on low prices. Is that the same, Sylvia? Is that the same in the US, that there are all these banners out in the supermarkets as to how cheap everything is, as opposed to perhaps how good everything is?
100%. It is price driven, and it's very hard to compete when you know what you have to have for your margin to pay your labor, healthy working wage, and to buy the correct inputs to take care of the soil. You could never be as cheap as the supermarket brand that is 69 cents a pound when you need to be $1.39 for produce. So I think that's a wee bit discouraging. But to her question, I would say find a farm. I'm sure there are many of us that would love to have an extra set of hands for even a day. And if you spend a day with the farmer doing the work with them, all of a sudden you say, I should be paying even more than what you're charging, because this is really hard. You have to learn soil science. You have to learn animal husbandry. You have to learn all the different things. So if you just spend a little time with the farmer, find an agritourism operation that lets you spend time with the farmer, that's the best hands-on education you will ever have. If you spend half a day pulling sweet potatoes on your hands and knees out of the mud, you will never, ever say, why are sweet potatoes $1.49 a pound for organic sweet potatoes?
Good point. Very good point. I noticed that you said, I have lost it, that in the US, this was another question, what's the ratio coming out of agricultural college, of the attendees, female to male? I know you answered that to say that it's 60-40 ratio female to male entering agricultural college in the US. Who knows what it is in the UK at the moment? I know that certainly from catering colleges, I think there's a pretty much 50-50 going into catering colleges, but only 20% of women are coming out and going into restaurants. So, Helen?
Yeah, I think that's probably true with people going into, I don't know what the actual ratios are across all the colleges at the moment, but I think that there are a lot more women going in than there used to be. And certainly when you look at things like the veterinary profession, my daughter's a vet as well as a farmer, and there's a lot of women, it's probably 80% women going into the veterinary careers, but they're not persisting. They're falling out of the system before they get very far up the chain. So they're being dissuaded, or they find it hard to take career breaks for family reasons, that kind of thing, in the way that you might do in some other sectors. It dogs women everywhere. But I think in a sort of physically working environment, unless it's your business, I think it's harder to keep climbing. And you're seeing a lot of interest in early parts of career, but a lot of fallout. And that's what we've got to help with, to make these careers more viable for women, but in the way that we have done in other walks of life to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is the same in the catering world. Now let me see what else. Anne Dollamore asks, does Helen think the reason for so few women in farm management is because it's not promoted, or so much, you know, in careers departments or in schools and universities? Is it, I suppose is it normally people from the agricultural world and agricultural families who tend to go to agricultural college?
Yes, I think it is. And I think that it's a really good point that Anna makes. The careers officers do not think about farming as a career for girls, probably not even for boys actually either. When my daughter was at school and having careers advice, even though she was, I love working outside, love working with animals, come from a farm, they told her to be a sports instructor. You know, that was what came out. That's what the system.
Right.
You know, you should go into the leisure industry or something. I mean, it was completely crackpot. She was almost telling them, I want to be a farmer. And the advice was the opposite. And when, okay, it's a long time ago since I was at school, but even though I was saying, I want to farm when I grow up, everybody was trying to persuade me to do something else, including my own mother. They all wanted me to do other things. No, you need to go and read English. You need to go do this and that and the other. So I think there's not much encouragement, and particularly for this, for doing it as a profession, rather than just running it as your own business. Nobody's saying, right, farm management, Rosie, that would be a good thing for you to get stuck into. And we need to create those career pathways. We're not great at doing that on farms. Some of the bigger farms have more opportunity to do that, but you've got to give women the exposure to the different roles they need to play within the business so that they can develop all of those skills and be in a position to push for those jobs.
Yeah,
I think Helen is very correct in saying that a lot of women enter the ag college and they are dissuaded into doing something else. We see in the United States that they usually end up in environmental science. But it's very difficult, and I think I mentioned this before, that it's hard to farm by pencil, and we have to make sure that we're talking to our instructors in colleges and our government and everyone else to say, if you don't have some hands-on experience, it's hard to explain to someone why they should or should not choose that as a career.
Can I jump in? I mean, I mean, here you have this panel, you know, so much that's interesting has come out of it. How do you begin to reach girls in school and universities? I mean, how could you organize yourselves to be role models for this hardly ever mentioned career in farming and growing?
Well, here, oh, sorry.
Go, Selena.
No, I was just going to say, here in Scotland, we've got the Royal Highland Educational Trust that bring schools out to farms. So that's kind of a positive thing that I think we all need to do more of, along with kind of like Leaf Farm Sunday type of schemes, and just letting people come out to see us and see what we're doing.
Yeah. Do you all, I mean, I not you, Sylvia, because you're in Tennessee, but Jess and Selena and Helen, do you all take part in Open Farm Sunday?
So
you go.
Helen.
Okay. So yes, we do Open Farm Sunday, lots of farm visits here generally. And through the Soil Association, we run a project called Food for Life, which is about food education in schools and helping kids learn to grow and to cook and getting them out onto farms. And I think increasingly, actually, what we need to be doing is getting farmers into schools, ideally female farmers. I do that occasionally myself, go and talk to girls' schools or to schools generally, and try and promote farming as something that might enter their head as a career path. And I think that's probably what we need to do, is to get either to get it onto the curriculum or get women going in and talking to kids and just opening their eyes to the possibility of this.
Yeah. Well, Jackie, you're going to.
Speaking about Open Farm Sunday, it leads me to perhaps a more flippant question from Chantal Cody. Chantal is the wonderful chocolate maker who founded Rococo Chocolates, but is now the chocolate detective. Chantal says, okay, maybe a bit silly question, but what do it's the UK farmers here, Sylvia, you won't know what I'm talking about, but what do they think about the Archers storyline? Is it a good reflection of real farmers, especially Helen as a cheesemaker? Now, I'm sure you're all too busy ever to listen to the Archers, but in case you have, Selina, do you know what I'm talking about here? Have you ever followed the Archers, this 50-year, radio?
I'm afraid I don't listen to it enough. My sister, who's a divorce lawyer, she takes great interest. They have a lot of women-related kind of issues, don't they? But I'm afraid I can't comment on the storyline.
All right. What about you, Jess?
I keep up with the highlights from Stroud Farmers Market that customers come and tell me, but I haven't actually ever listened to it firsthand, which is, yeah, I'm always too busy here.
Cool. I bet that's the same for you as well, Helen.
No. I am an Archers addict and have been for decades. So I never miss the Archers, even if I have to listen on catch up. It's the kind of stuff I can do when I'm, doing my occasional bits of housework, which is very rare. I think the Archers does a great job, actually. It's really on the money in terms of starting to talk about the things that are coming up in farming. And I think they've got a good span of the kind of your farming personas, as it were. And I think they've been quick onto things like agroforestry and rewilding and some of those kind of themes that now on the kind of grazing systems, outwintering, that a lot of your more progressive farmers are talking about. So I think they've been. I think it's still keeping the farming issues in the public eye in a way that actually wouldn't happen through any other means. I'm a big fan.
Oh, good. Well, so am I. So am I, even though I criticise it the whole time. But, I'm delighted to hear that. I'm in good company. So we are approaching 2:30. I think it's only fair to let you busy women get back to what you're supposed to be doing. Sheila, anything more from you, please?
I was delighted by it. I was anticipating it being interesting. It's been far more interesting even than I thought it was going to be. I like Bev, I think he was one of the American dames, who said online, wouldn't it be great to do this every month, celebrating local women in farming across the world? And you think, yeah, that's Zoom. We can have the dots in Zambia and the dots in Tasmania, and it'll be great. I mean, what an addition Sylvia has been. I mean, who knew? I didn't know there was this marvelous farm inside the city limits of Nashville. Anyway, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jackie.
Oh, well, thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Jess and Selina, Sylvia and Helen. It really has been a fabulous discussion, and you will be able to see from the comments, and our audience has really loved it. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of International Women's Day.
Yes, I wish I could toast as a water. Yeah, International Women's Day.
Cheers.
All right, thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Great pleasure.
Goodbye, Sylvia. Goodbye, Selina.